Okay, Dr. Cunningham, why don't you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your connection to agriculture?
I absolutely will. Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us today. This is going to be probably the best part of my week, so I'm excited to share my Wednesday midday with you. So, I teach animal science classes at Colorado State University in Fort Collins, and what we talk a lot about how to raise livestock. So, beef cows and dairy cows and pigs and sheep. We talk about horses and we talk about how to raise them responsibly and the things that we need to feed them, and how we need to care for them, and then how they can contribute to our lives as humans. So I have a pretty cool job. I get to work with some pretty neat students. And so maybe some of you, you know, I might still be here by the time you get to Colorado State. But if I'm still here when you get here, let's not point out that we met in 2021. Okay. But before I got to CSU, actually, so when I was in elementary school, I grew up on my family's ranch in western Nebraska. We raise cattle, and those are beef cattle. And then we also farm. We raise alfalfa for hay for our cows. We also raise corn, and we use that in to feed our cows. And then sometimes we'll grow some rye or wheat or oats. And most of the time, we use that also for feed for our cows. So that is my connection to agriculture. And then I was very involved in 4 H, and I showed livestock and judged livestock. And I really liked animals and the people that raise livestock and animals for food. And so that's what I wound up doing in college. And then I really liked going to school. And so I really am still in school, right? Because I'm still on a campus. But that's my connection to agriculture. And everyone's is a little bit different. And so it's okay if you don't come from a farm. But I think what is the coolest thing is that you're here today to learn about what is happening on the farm and what farmers and ranchers are doing for everyone across America and even in other countries, because we do send food and goods outside of our country. So the work that we do as farmers and ranchers and the business that we do as farmers and ranchers is pretty cool and much bigger than our farm.
Great. Awesome. All right. Well, let's get to it then. Remember to keep in mind any questions that you might have either about the book or, just about agriculture in general. So, Sam, do you want to introduce the book or would you like me to?
I sure can. Today we're going to read Still Good, The Faces and Family of Agriculture. It is, our author is Rachel Gable. She's also a writer for the Fence Post magazine. And our book takes a look at agriculture now and then agriculture earlier. So we're going to look back kind of into the mid 1900s. And so it'll be a comparison and compare and contrast of these two eras. So I'm anxious to see what things y'all find interesting from the book and then what questions you have when we're done.
Perfect. Okay, we'll get started.
The leather photo album creaked as the boy opened it, sending dust swirling into the light from the attic window. Out in the yard, he could see cattle milling around the pens and the rows of corn dancing in the wind. He flipped to a yellowing page with a black and white photo. Below it, someone had neatly written, "The Boys and Patsy, 1950." He turned to another photo and another before deciding he needed to know more. He knew exactly who would know more. He opened the screen door to the farmhouse and it groaned. He stepped on the porch and the old dog and the old boards groaned. A quilt flapped in the breeze on the clothesline. The boy sat down on the porch beside his grandfather, who was oiling a shovel handle. He looked over and saw the book in the boy's lap. "I haven't seen that book for a while," Grandpa said. Farming sure is different now than it was. They opened the book to the photo of the boys and the milk cow. The older boy was hunkered on a little stool, milking a cow. The younger boy had his thumbs hooked in the straps of his overalls, a dog near his feet. Old Patsy, Grandpa said, pulling the book and the boy closer. We always had a milk cow around. She was a shorthorn. I used to weigh every bucket of milk to fill 10-gallon cans. We would sell those cans, and my dad would give me a few cents from the milk check. That was back when even a few cents could buy something. The boy turned the page to a photo of a long-legged boy standing next to a man with a weathered hat in front of an old tractor. Grandpa looked at the photo and leaned back in his chair. That old tractor could really run, he said. It was hot on that metal seat in the summer, and there was no heat when it was cold. That tractor is still out in the barn. Maybe I'll teach you to drive it sometime. They could sure build things to last. The next photo was of a young boy standing proudly next to a steer. Grandpa studied the photo and sat back in his chair, tipping his straw hat back on his head and taking a long drink of tea. At his feet, the dog sighed. That boy, not much older than you, was me, he said. I took that Hereford steer to the fair and won a blue ribbon. That fall, I led the steer down the alley at the Denver Union Stockyards, and the buyers would all sit on the wooden fence rails that lined the alleys. I stood up straight and led that steer, hoping those buyers would bid. I couldn't understand the auctioneer's chant. That's what it's called when they talk so quickly, but they sure seemed to. Grandpa turned another page to a photo of a young woman in a dress behind rows of pumpkins and baskets filled with apples, zucchini, potatoes, onions, watermelons, and peppers. This is your grandma when she was young, he said. Her dad farmed, and it took him and the boys all summer to irrigate the produce. It was like watering our garden, but they did it for entire fields. Each morning, your grandma would drive the old pickup to the farm stand where she would sell off the produce they grew. That's where I met her. I ate a lot of vegetables that summer, looking for excuses to see her. He paused and smiled at the photo. This was back when farmers irrigated with shovels and set tubes by hand, he said. There were no pivot sprinklers. It was back when irrigating was a full-time job all by itself. You couldn't buy fruits and vegetables anytime you wanted. They were available when they were in season, and people stored them in root cellars and put them up in glass canning jars, like Grandma does with her dilled green beans and jellies. The boys smiled at the mention of Grandma's jars of green beans. They were his favorite. He turned the page. The photo was of a young man trailing sheep through a small town. A horse pulled a round-topped herder's wagon behind the ewes, and dogs and kids on horseback were on all sides. That family has been raising sheep near Meeker for nearly 100 years, he said. They took them high in the summer and brought them back down in the fall. Herders stayed with the sheep and protected them from bears, wolves, and mountain lions, and kept them together and safe. It takes a lot of work to raise lambs, but I'm glad people still do it. The boy thought about wool socks in the winter and Grandma's lamb chops at Easter. Me too, the boy said. We've bought a lamb from them every year for as long as I can remember, Grandpa said. We always knew where our meat came from, raised either on our farm or on a neighbor's. When this photo was taken, there weren't refrigerated trucks to haul meat across the country. The next photo was of a handsome young man standing beside a small airplane. Who is that, Grandpa? Well, son, that's me, he said. You were a pilot? The boy was sitting up straight now, eager to learn more. Grandpa scratched the dog that was now inching closer to him in search of a cool breeze. Yep, he said. You know how the yellow airplanes spray the neighbors' fields? The boy nodded. Well, I used to do that, he said. I'd fly low, buzzing the fields for the farmers that had hired me. I learned to fly in the war, so when I came home, I figured out a way to get back in the air. It was dangerous, and it still is, but it was a thrill and an important job. When I flew near our farm, I would waggle my wings back and forth to say hello to your grandma. As summer turned to fall, the boy returned to school. Though he thought he would learn more on the porch with Grandpa and helping water the garden and fixing the old tractor and checking the cows than he did at a desk. The boy had asked to borrow the leather book, and he had carried it home carefully, protecting it like it contained treasures and knowing it did indeed. As he stepped into his own house, he had an idea. After school, the boy did his chores, ate dinner, and then sat at the kitchen table, neatly writing letters and folding them into envelopes, which he put in the mailbox at the end of the drive as he waited for the bus. Each day, he hustled off to the school bus and checked the mailbox. He flipped through the bills and catalogs for seed, bulls, and tractors. Finally, one day, there was an envelope with his name on it. 5 more envelopes slowly arrived, and he sat at the kitchen table with the leather book open and worked as his mother moved around the kitchen and as the ag news played on the TV or television. It was Friday when he carried the leather album down the driveway to his grandpa's porch. A quilt was drying on the line, dancing as the wind blew it. The dog and the old man stood and watched the boy run towards them. He bounded up the stairs and held the leather book out to his grandpa. Take a look, he told his grandpa, his heart beating fast from running and anticipation. Grandpa opened the book and saw again the photo of the 2 boys and a roan milk cow. On the facing page, the boy had carefully placed a color photo of Holstein cows in a spotless milking barn. The stainless steel gleamed, and 2 men walked alongside the cows, ensuring that the robotic milker cups attached correctly. Well, I'll be, Grandpa said, studying the photo. Where did you find this? I wrote a letter to the family who owns Chapin Dairy Family Dairies, asking for a photo of them milking cows, he said. Mr. Chapin told me that the robots milk the cows and test the milk, and they're able to safely milk more cows and make sure the milk is clean and the cows feel good. It only takes a few people to milk a lot of cows. Robots. I'll be darned, Grandpa said. They even have a robot to push the feed close to the cows so it's always there and fresh. And big tanker trucks pick up milk every day, the boy said. Dairy farming is different now than it was when you milked Patsy, but it's still good. Grandpa turned the page to the photo of the long-legged boy standing by the tractor. On the facing page were 2 men, father and son, in front of a combine and tractor hooked to a disc. Behind them, Grandpa could see a center pivot against the blue sky. That is Mark Arndt and his dad, the boy said. They came from Germany to grow sugar beets in 1951, but now they grow wheat and they have a 3rd generation working with them too. Grandpa held the book close, studying the modern combine and tractor, and he smiled when he looked back at the black and white photo, remembering the little red tractor. Much different than what we had, he said. Different, but still good. The next page was the photo of Grandpa as a boy and his Hereford steer. Next to it, the boy had taped a photo of an auctioneer in a crisp shirt and an evenly creased hat, leaning close to a microphone with his hand pointing to the crowd, calling bids. In the ring was a fancy set of Hereford steers. Pardon me, is a fancy set of Hereford heifers. Next to the auctioneer sat two people with cell phones and computer screens in front of them. Miss Robin at the livestock exchange sent me this photo when I wrote to her, the boy said. He pointed to the computer. That's how people at home can buy cattle on their computer or phone, he said. Grandpa grinned and he said he had never heard of such a thing. They still chant and take bids, and Miss Robin says they still serve cherry pie, and it's really good, the boy said. Grandpa smiled when he turned the page to the photo of Grandma as a girl. Next to it was a photo of a young woman in shorts and a t-shirt leaning on a crate of cantaloupes. Mrs. Gale Knapp sent me this photo, the boy said. They've been selling produce at their farm stand for over 30 years. Their melons are trucked to grocery stores in several states because they produce more than they can sell at their stand. And not everyone who wants to buy their produce can come to their farm. They have Rocky Ford cantaloupes and watermelon, peppers that tumble in the roaster over a flame, sweet corn, okra, onions, potatoes, peaches, and jars of apple butter. Mrs. Knapp said that the apple butter they sell is made exactly to my grandma's famous recipe, and it's the best around. They both knew that was one of those things that hadn't changed and was still good. On the last page was the photo of the sheep trotting toward town. On the facing page was a new color photo of a young boy following the sheep through the small town. That's Ari Theos, the boy said. He's the 5th generation of sheep producers on their ranch. They still trail ewes like they did when his grandpa was his age. Some things change only a little and are still good. Grandpa smiled and sat back in his chair, with the leather book closed on his lap. Together, the two looked over the farm and thought of the farms just beyond their view, with pivot irrigation, big tractors, and the setting sun, knowing it was different, but still good.